Good evening, everyone. Thank you for those of you joining us in person. And as always, thank you for those folks on Zoom. I would like to call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order. The next regular Board of Education meeting is on Tuesday, April 26th at 7:30 p.m. in the board meeting room. So I will kick off to the chairperson's report. And I would like to, I think it's very exciting. We've talked about this over the course of the last year. It's something Dr. Adley brought to the table. So I think it's very exciting. We've heard a lot since my time on the board, and especially over the last couple of years, about the voice of the students, hearing from students, making sure students feel like they're participating in everything that's going on in the district. And we have an incredibly high-performing district, not just the academics and the curriculum, but the theater, the music, the choir, the sports. It's the full package. I was at the choir and chorus musical this past Tuesday, and it was just phenomenal. As I said, the theater and the Adams Family was just phenomenal too. So with that, I'd like to welcome the two student reps to the Board of Education. So I'd like to welcome Olivia Punichel and John Raskoff as our two student representatives. Welcome and congratulations. They went through quite an interview process and an application process, had to get signatures from students, had to get signatures from teachers, went through an interview process, not just with the high school staff, but with the cabinet and the administration. And then Dr. Adley and I spent Tuesday morning with them up at the high school, talking and going over stuff. And when I walked in the room and saw John there, he stood next to me the night before singing in choir. They lined up through the rows and did a beautiful Russian folk song, which was just phenomenal. So with that, welcome, congratulations. And I will turn it over to each of you for just a quick update about yourselves. So why don't we start with you, Olivia? Just move the mic to you.
Let's give these guys
Thank
a round.
you.
I know we've given
We'll give them a round of applause,
right?
too.
Welcome.
My name is Olivia Punichel. I'm a senior at Darien High School. And additionally, I'm a varsity softball captain, and I'm fairly involved in DHS clubs and activities. And I'm very excited to be a part of this important governing body when it comes to education in our town.
And hi, I'm John Raskoff. I'm a member of the junior class at DHS, and I'm involved in theater, music, the chorus, the band, all of that. And I'm really equally excited as Livy is to be a part of this organization. So thank you.
Well, we're excited to have you on board, and thank you for all that you've done and all that you do on a regular basis at the school as leaders. So we're excited to have you here. So welcome. With that, I'd like to also take a moment. It was a very difficult week last week for the district, for our students, for our families. So I would like to take a moment and just extend our thoughts and our prayers around Matthew McAvoy and his family and his friends. A lot of hard work went into supporting our students and our community last week, and especially supporting Matthew, his family, and all his close friends. So just a moment of silence, please, around that. And the service will be tomorrow, Thursday at 1 o'clock at the Norotan Presbyterian Church. And as a community, as a family, we'll continue to do all that we can do to support the family and support ourselves. So thank you. With that, I have nothing further to say on that. I will move to public comment.
Good evening. For participants in person, please wait for the chairperson to acknowledge and call you up. For participants via Zoom, please click the raise hand option. The facilitator will acknowledge and unmute each participant. Please state your name and address for the record log. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment.
We will start with anyone that's in the audience first. If they want to come up and speak, please come up to the podium. Sure, please come up to the podium, sir. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Doug Wilson, and I live at 43 Arrowhead Way in Darien, Connecticut. I'm also a board member of the Blue Wave Booster Club. For those of you that don't know, the Blue Wave Booster Club was formed in 2006 to support all Darien teams, the band, and the cheer squad. Since founding in 2006, we've raised over $650,000 that have been distributed to all Darien teams. I'm here today to support greater flexibility around the hours that Darien High School stadium lights can be utilized. The current agreement governing the usage of lights is overly restrictive and puts our Darien High School teams at a competitive disadvantage versus our surrounding communities. The current agreement places onerous restrictions on the number of games and matches that each team can conduct under the lights, and an outright prohibition against JV and freshman games under illumination. Furthermore, the current agreement prohibits spring youth sports from enjoying illumination events, despite the fact that early season practices routinely encounter twilight conditions. The rules governing the usage of lights are arbitrary and capricious. They don't reflect the technology that was ultimately invested in, and they were negotiated bilaterally without adequate review from the Darien Board of Education and did not offer the community an opportunity to be heard in public hearing. Concerns regarding light spillage have proven to be unfounded. This has been verified by drone footage in the initial night that the lights were energized. Now that the 5-year standstill period has expired, the Board of Education has the opportunity to apply for a new revised permit, and it's time that all of the Darien community, and not just a small group of property owners, have a say in how our facilities are allowed to operate for the benefit of our children, our students, and our broader community. Thank you.
Thank you for speaking this evening. Anyone else in the room? Thank you.
Good evening, all. I hope you're well. My name is Chris Harwick. I'm at 108 Inwood Road, Darien, Connecticut, and I'm also the president of the Darien Junior Football League. The DJFL operates the youth football program here in Darien from grades 1 through 8, and along with 9 other towns in Fairfield County, we make up the Fairfield County Football League. We've had tremendous success the last couple of years with our program. We've had over 60 coaches and 450 players participate last year in over 600 practices and games. I'm here tonight to request the Board of Education apply for a revised special permit for the Darien High School stadium lights. From our understanding, the Board of Education was not included in discussions for the original permit when the lights were issued and installed in 2017. And that permit included many restrictions that limited the ability of both our schools and our youth sports organizations to use the lights that were so generously donated by many in our community. The DGFL relies on the stadium and Darien High School to hold practices during the week and games each weekend, August through November. The current restrictions that require the lights to be turned off at 7:30 p.m. every weekend night, or weekday night rather, places significant limitations on our ability to schedule practices for our athletes and our coaches. The high school sports typically occupy the stadium until 6 p.m. each night, after which the DGFL is allocated the next 90 minutes, for which further reduces by the necessary to set up and take down fields at the end of the day and move supplies around safely before the lights go off. While there are instances where athletes are able to gain access to the stadium earlier than 6 o'clock on some occasions, many of our volunteer parent coaches commute to New York City, and it's extremely difficult for those coaches to arrive before 6 p.m. As a result, we're forced to combine numerous teams on one field at a time to limit the time of practice during the latter part of the season when daylight is shortened, putting us at disadvantage to our FCFL opponents. When the Darien Athletic Foundation, with the help of numerous community organizations and volunteers, raised the funds necessary to install and purchase the lights at the stadium, it went to great lengths and expense to ensure that the lighting technology was the best available. The design and installations of the lights were completed in such a way that they generate zero light spillage to surrounding fields and homes. This is evident by anyone that has attended one of our weekly practices, a night game at the stadium, or viewed the various drone footage that you can find out there, what a fully lit stadium completes darkness just outside the lighting of the envelope. In closing, I request the Board of Education consider applying for a revised special permit that will allow our community to use the Darien High School Stadium lights until 9 p.m.
Mr. Harwick, you're at time, 3 minutes.
3 minutes, thank you. I'll just finish up really quick. With a 15-minute, 50% dim period from 9 to 9:15 to allow our teams full 2 hours of practice. This will also allow us to break down the fields in a safe manner and let the coaches and the kids get to their cars in a lighted, safe manner. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there, good evening. I'm Jennifer Montanaro. I'm the president of the Darien Athletic Foundation at 86 Maywood Road. I thought rather than go through the specifics, I might take you down memory lane just a little bit. There are a lot of new faces here. I'm not sure everybody knows the story. So it's been 10 years since we founded the Darien Athletic Foundation with nearly $9 million raised by very, very generous townspeople. When we first developed our master plan, which was what we called it, we received initial input that stadium lights were controversial, period, end of story. So our initial plan excluded stadium lights and was focused mainly on increasing field usability by making some of the fields all-weather fields, getting rid of the porta potties, and instead planning a concession stand with bathrooms. And we planned a multimedia scoreboard. So during the first few years, we held over 400 public meetings to get input on our master plan. And what we learned was really surprising, that there was actually widespread support for lights at the stadium. And the resistance actually came from a very small number of people. While we could have proposed a donation of traditional lights, we did the due diligence and we offered cutting edge technology at the time. It took a lot of site visits to colleges, universities throughout the tri-state area. LED lights cost twice as much as traditional lights, but offered so much lower operating costs for the school with minimal light spillage, as you've all seen, I'm sure, in photographs. The DAF has always said that we're happy to make gifts to the school and to the town, but we expect that the gifts be utilized and well-maintained. We were quite disappointed when Dr. Brenner, then superintendent, entered into a bilateral user agreement with just a few neighbors and did not fully consult the relevant constituencies, including the DAF. We feel the lights have been underutilized since they were installed. The guiding principles should be what is good for the community and to honor the original spirit of what our donation set out to be. Thank you for our time.
Thanks for speaking this evening. Anyone else in person? Yes.
Hi, Paul Mahalski, 371 Middlesex Road. And I am a party to that agreement as one of the neighbors of the high school. And I also want to take you down a little bit of memory lane because I listened to the facilities committee meeting on March 10th, and there were a lot of questions and conjecture about what happened actually 5 years ago. So let me do this in the way of questions. Were the light guidelines drafted by lawyers, neighbors, or others who didn't understand the school's needs? No, they were drafted by the Darien Public School Administration after extensive discussions with the athletic director and coaches, and they were based upon the guidelines that were recommended by the Special Stadium Lights Committee of this board and proposed by the board to the Planning and Zoning Commission in 2008. They were presented to the neighbors as meeting the needs of the athletes, accommodating the needs of Darien youth sports to continue practicing during daylight savings times, and as being reasonable in light of the limitations that were adopted in other districts. Did the Board of Education usurp the P&Z's authority by presenting light guidelines agreed with the neighbors? No, the role of the P&Z when reviewing a special permit is purely administrative. It is not legislative. They don't have the authority to say, we think you should have more than you've asked for. Was the standstill agreement unprecedented? Yes and no. No, there are other school districts that have entered into standstills with neighbors over lights. Westport has a 12-year agreement. In fact, Darien entered into a 20-year agreement with a neighbor when the new high school was built. Where it is unique is that those standstill agreements are called settlement agreements after acrimonious fights. This was, at the neighbor's suggestion, a collaborative solution to end the years of distrust, tension, and conflict and do it in a collaborative way. Was the standstill agreement something only neighbors wanted? No, it wasn't. The superintendent also saw the benefit of a period in which the Board of Education and Administration didn't have to deal with constant pushes for more and more. In fact, in 2008, the chairman of the board, after P&Z rejected lights, said, we're not going to push more because this has consumed 2 years of the board's time. Was the only concern lights on the neighbors? No, it wasn't. The light nuisance, as was said, these lights are much better than 2008. But really, the biggest issue is what comes with lights. And that's with games, and that's the noise of whistles, the PA system, the music. I sit behind a double pane windows in my house, and I can't think. If you're working at home or you have kids who have to study, you actually can't concentrate when the games are going on. So that is far more intrusive. Was the limitation of the games to varsity sports a neighbor demand? No, it wasn't. That was the administration prioritizing games to the varsity sports, knowing that there needed to be a limit to the number of games. And that 12-game limit came from the recommendations of this board in 2008 as to the number of games that was reasonable looking at other schools. Were the lights limited to games involving DHS teams? Why? That again came from the board and it came in 2008, as well as the administration. Why aren't there games on Saturdays?
You are almost at time also, Paul.
Okay. Youth games, again, back in 2008, the priority was put on the high school. In 2016, the superintendent actually felt that from an educational perspective, the school shouldn't be encouraging students to be playing late at night. Finally, 7:30 time, 6 o'clock for years was the time when there were temporary lights because of daylight savings time. In 2008, this board recommended 8 o'clock. The neighbors had asked for 7. The compromise was 7:30. The music limitations, again, go back to what this board actually proposed in 2008.
I'm going to have to say your time
and
is
so-
up, Paul.
Great,
Thank
thanks.
you.
And I actually have just copies for you of this, just since it was.
Thank you. Thanks for speaking.
Thank you.
Michelle, do we have anyone else online?
There are no raised hands at this time.
Okay, thank you all for coming and speaking tonight in public comment. We'll move on to the superintendent's report.
Good evening, everyone, and certainly, I'm sure you'll forgive me if I also say that the district is heartbroken at the sudden passing of our beloved student, Matthew McAvoy. The administration and staff extend their deepest condolences and sympathies to the family. I want to thank the staff for their extraordinary response, support, and compassion displayed to our students and also from our students as collectively we go through the healing process together. This is a very, very special place for very, very special reasons. The community and the relationships that we have together and rallying around any particular cause. It's our strength, and it's what will bind us together and lead us through this particular challenging time. At a time where few words can comfort, I just want to express my appreciation to all the organizations in town, the town's human resources, the town's public officials, the clergy, and all the other organizations who have reached out and provided direct support for us. Please know it's comforting to our students, to our staff, to our school community, and indeed to the greater Darien community. And along those lines, a community conversation on grief and loss will be hosted by Darien's Human Services Department. They have been working with us very closely over the last few days. And this event will be held on Friday, April 8th by Zoom, and we'll make that widely known. That'll be sent out this evening. Again, welcome to Olivia and John. It's great to have you here. I just want to share that the district has enrolled 3 students from Ukraine in the recent days, and possibly one more. And we extend a warm welcome to those students. The Booster Club recently had a very successful fundraiser, and appreciate all the staff and stuff who actually participated in it. I had one less shining moment playing basketball. We'll leave it at that. I want to congratulate all those who participated. If you want to watch it, it's on TV. But
Don't kid yourself.
congratulations to the concert and those who performed last night, and to the young composers who are on stage this evening. Robotics at Darien Foundation did a video shoot today, profiling the success of the 13 clubs that we have. And on May 13th, there will be an intramural competition for the clubs in 3 through 5 and 6 through 8. The district was also featured in an article, the Teachers College Reading and Writing Project that I got today, and I will forward that to the board. It was for our long-term commitment and innovative practices around allowing teachers more choice in professional development. Thank you to a few board members who down the stretch here made some accommodations to try and focus on a date for the retreat. Currently, it looks like the July 13th is the date. So I'll confirm that in writing to you, but I'll just share that now. If anybody's circumstances have changed, if you just let me know. And yes, next week is spring recess, and I just want to wish our families and everyone in the Darien community a peaceful and rejuvenating break. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dudden. We will move on to approve student representative reports.
Yes, it has my name here only because we're announcing you now. So for future board meetings, your names will be on here, and this is the time where you give your updates to the board. So Livia, why don't you go first?
Amazing.
Or if that's whatever your organization is, you've talked. Go ahead.
We have a system. So we thought that the best way to do this was just kind of to ping back and forth, because quite a few things happened at DHS. The thing that we decided to open with was the musical closed a few weeks ago as chairman. I'm not sure how I should address this, right?
Chairman's fine.
As chairman had already briefly mentioned, it was one of the best things that we have done as a 30308 club for several years, actually, and we've been told as such by several different people outside of the DHS community.
Another important note, and Dr. Adley had mentioned some of the community's attempts at valiant attempts at aiding people from Ukraine. The DHS Community Council just held a very successful bake sale outside of Uncle's Deli in support of the struggle in Ukraine.
As Dr. Adley mentioned, actually, the Uncle Posters concert is going on right now, which is a funny thing because my piece was performed first, and so we had to kind of make it first because it's supposed to be second to last, which would have been right now. So thankfully that was moved, but I rushed over and changed clothing.
Also on the theme of the evening, sports, the spring sports season just began. I think all official sports teams, their season started last week, and some FCAT conference games are going to be starting this week. And there's going to be quite a few scheduled over spring break if anyone has some time.
The Spanish department at DHS is going on a trip to Spain starting tomorrow. We leave DHS at about 10 in the morning. It'll be the first trip in several years because of the whole COVID situation, and we're hoping that we can continue doing that sort of thing in the future.
Right now, it's a very exciting time for a lot of our Darien seniors as our internship programs, they're becoming finalized right now. Many students have finalized their plans in the portal and are very excited to start their internships in May. I believe they start on May 16th. Additionally, most of our students are capping off their time in the classroom and finishing up capstone papers, which are an integral part of our English curriculum. And also many students are receiving college acceptances and determining where they're going to spend their next 4 years. So it's an exciting time for the class of 2022.
Exactly. And finally, Dr. Tranberg has been working on the names. Sorry, no, that's a completely different thing, actually. The DHS student body has been working on the Names Day program, which will be April 26th, right after we get back from break. And it will be all about anti-bullying, and the thing itself is called Names because it's names can hurt us, and it's all about being more inclusive in the DHS community and trying to make sure that everyone's heard, everyone's emotions are acknowledged, and everyone feels safe. So that's a very important part of this upcoming month.
I think that was a beautiful job.
Well done. Thank you.
And
very
moving
much.
forward, Dr. Adley will coordinate my remarks with yours so that I don't take any of your announcements.
Take any of their steam.
Great job. Well done.
Well
Well
done.
done and welcome.
Thank you. We'll move on to approval of minutes. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of the regular meeting held on March 22nd, 2022. May I have a motion, Mr. Sini, second by Mrs. Achman. All those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. We will move on to board committee reports. Any board committee reports? Mr. Maroney.
Yes, the Facilities Committee met as public comment has informed us on March 10th. It will also be item 8A today. We discussed the, excuse me, the standstill agreement of the lights, and we had 3 goals at the end of the meeting. 1 was to honor the spirit of the agreement. 2 was to revise the special permit to eliminate the standstill. And 3 was to return appropriate decision-making authority to the district.
Thank you, Mr. Maroney. Any other? Yep. Mrs.
The
Parent.
Curriculum Committee met last Wednesday, March 30th. We had a presentation from Christina Mauricio, who's the World Language Department Chair. She shared some exciting changes that are happening in the World Language Program. We talked about how the department approaches the development of their curriculum and spoke about how they will be utilizing the new EduPlanet tool going forward. We learned about the new Mandarin curriculum at the middle school and the new AP Spanish Lit course at DHS. Ms. Mauricio shared the stamp scores from Middlesex and DHS, and our students fared very well. So she was very pleased with all of their hard work of the students and the teachers. We had the highest number of students receiving the seal of biliteracy since 2017. So that's exciting. She said there's the most number of languages involved in that. So that's kind of cool. So our thanks to Christina for leading the department into the future. And we wish her well with 58 students in Spain starting tomorrow. We also heard an update from Dr. Tramberg on the work of the Gifted Education Steering Committee. We discussed the elementary math acceleration, and we will look forward to hearing some suggestions from them this summer at this table. They suggested that scheduling at the middle school is being actively discussed, as is the Achievers program at the high school. So there's some good work being done all around. So thanks to everybody on that steering committee for that work. And our next meeting is Thursday, the 28th.
Great. Thank you, Mrs. Parent. Anything on Royal Finley and Homes? You are fast and furious weekly.
We are Fast and Furious Weekly. Yes, the committee's meeting weekly through the end of June. We've issued the architect RFP, which I had mentioned last meeting. We're hearing back with questions. That selection process is coming up shortly after break. We've issued an RFQ for construction manager, and we've started on surveys, and we're in the process of selecting someone to take a look at traffic. And we're looking at hazmats. So yes, we are running.
Great, thank you. Oxbridge, we have not had a meeting recently other than weekly construction updates. Continues to be on schedule for a move-in as soon as school is over and starting demolition in phase 2. So that's exciting. Any other board committee reports? We are good. So we'll move on to presentations and discussions. We will move on to further discussion on high school stadium lights. Dr. Adley, Mr. Manfredonia, we have a guest who's zooming in, Mr. Joseph Williams, who is a land attorney from Shipman and Goodwin. And we have a presentation here. I appreciate facilities. We kind of went through, or we're trying to go through a process here so that we have the right input, the right feedback. We want to be, and we are, and we will continue to be good neighbors. I appreciate the facilities committee having a conversation now that the window has opened to look at the standstill agreement and have a conversation around that. What we want to do is understand from our land use attorney what potential changes can be made from a land use standpoint around noise and lights. There's also an operational component of it in terms of how we manage our facilities and manage those sports fields. Just a high level timeline that we've kind of organized around. We're having the board discussion this evening with the land use attorney. We will have board discussion around specific topics. The administration is proposing some recommendations. We will move to honor about the April 26th meeting, a public discussion and continued conversation at the board level. May 10th, we built a calendar to make a Board of Ed decision of any changes we want to make and start the process of filing a submission to the planning and zoning, which would be May 18th. Sometime in June, planning and zoning would have a public hearing. And in July, we would have any decision pertaining to any changes associated with the agreement. So a little bit of an overview at a high level of kind of how we want the process to go through. The key is, as Dennis said, continuing to be a good neighbor, managing the fields from a district perspective, as we've always managed our fields, and look to see that we can maximize the use of those fields and the investment that we've made in those fields. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. Manfredonia and Dr. Adley on some potential ideas or changes that they'd like to bring forward with respect to the operations of the field. So I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. And from the last Finance Committee meeting and also from the last board meeting, the administration took away the work to come back with recommendations or thoughts about the aspects of the agreement or the aspects of the actual petition, right? And from P&Z. I will say, Mr. Maroney, I did. You'll see in this slide that I collapsed those three goals. They were just simply from the Finance Committee, or sorry, the Facilities Committee, but I collapsed those three into essentially two, but one sentence of honoring the spirit of the agreement while maintaining decision-making authority. I think it still captures, you'll see that in the slide. I will say to members of the public this evening who are here, and actually to my board members, there's one additional slide that you were not provided because I was waiting for some information. And so that's the last slide that is online right now. So you can see the complete slide deck, but the last slide talks to some of the timelines and activities and next steps that the board chairman just spoke to. So you'll see that come up and we'll address that at the particular time. I would like to welcome also Joe Williams, Attorney Joe Williams from Shipman and Goodman, who will speak a little bit later and will be available here for questions from the board. Thank you to Mr. Manfredonia, Mrs. Dunn, Mr. Lynch for their reflection. It's with that group and myself that we sat down and looked at the current conditions under the agreement, and we bring forward just some thoughts, which will also provide a little bit of perspective and then just general thoughts of what we potentially would recommend and with the timeline and next steps. So with that, Mr. Manfredonia, thank you. Good evening here. You put it together, so I'll lead you through it.
Thank you, Dr. Hadley. So before I get into the meat of the presentation, I want to let the board know how wonderful it's been to have the field lights these last 5 years and what the experience has been at the school, especially. The energy and excitement around the school day is palpable during the school day when there's a night event. So it has been such a joy. It's been needed, and it's really been a wonderful experience for the students to be able to play games in the lights the last 5 years. So I start by saying that, and then I'll get into the nuts and bolts of the presentation. Okay. So I thought it's to first start off by just kind of starting off by where we're at, right? What are the current restrictions that we live under for the field lights? So you see the bullets on the left there. As you're all aware, the lights are off by 7:30 Monday through Thursday for practices or games for the high school. They're off by 10 o'clock if there's a Friday night game that the high school hosts. They are still off by 7:30 if there's a practice on Friday evenings. Varsity teams are allowed 2 night games per season, not including the playoffs. And again, that's night games. We typically start in the fall at 5:30 to ensure that those lights are off by 7:30 Monday through Thursday, and we'll have a typical 7 o'clock Friday game with the lights being off by 10 o'clock. The restrictions do not allow us to host an SCIAC or CIAC state game that doesn't involve DHS. So many times in FCIAC and CIAC play, schools are asked before the season to serve as a host site. We are unable to raise your hand, for lack of a better word, because we're not able to guarantee that Darien High School would be performing in those games. So that's a restriction that we are currently living under, that we cannot host an FCIAC or CIAC game that Darien High School is not involved with. So neutral site games are not permitted. And like I mentioned, the youth fall practices are over by 7:30 with the lights being turned off. The graph you see there on the right is a kind of a capsule, what we captured the last year of the games that we've experienced for both the fall and the spring. including playoff games. So we're allowed to have playoff games. So teams will have 2 regular season games plus playoff games if they're being hosted by Darien High School. There are situations where we give teams the option to select the night game that they want to play under the lights. Sometimes it doesn't work out with the schedule, the availability. So that's why you see girls soccer only had the 1 Friday night game this past fall, but they've had 2 in the past. Again, it depends on availability, depends on what the coach and the kids' preference are as well. Sometimes teams want to play in the light, sometimes they want to play in the center oval too, which is more of a kind of a, you know, of a closer atmosphere there. The next slide pulls data from local schools, what their restrictions, if any, are. And so you'll see there, the only schools that are in our area, in our league, that have restrictions are Greenwich and Staples. Greenwich is allowed 10 night games per year, fall and spring, in addition to 6 practices. New Canaan, with no restrictions at all, has between 15 to 20 fall night games, and then in the spring that number drops to less than 5. We don't see very many night games in the spring because of, you know, the daylight that we have the opportunity to take advantage of. Staples again has restrictions. They're allowed 8 total events for the year, including fall and spring. Then you see Wilton and schools like Wilton and Ridgefield have no restrictions. Wilton actually has 2 lit fields that they have the access to play games on. They have 21 fall events and then 22 in the spring. Ridgefield, same number, about 20 to 25 in the fall, and then that number drops to 6 in the spring, but again, no restrictions. So as Dr. Adley mentioned, we looked and talked about what the guiding principles for the lights. And the board goal is, of course, honoring the spirit and the agreement while maintaining decision-making authority with the district, which was mentioned earlier. The administration principles as we schedule stadium lights and games under the lights, creating schedules that allow families to attend more regularly with the later start times. Obviously, it's hard for families to always make a 4 o'clock start. It's easier if they can make 6 or 7 o'clock start where the lights will come into play. We want to continue the opportunities to amongst all teams to maximize use of stadium lights. Want to make sure it's fair and equitable for all teams to make sure they can use the lights as much as they possibly can. While still maintaining a reasonable time on school nights for DHS student athletes as well as our visiting students. We don't play too many 7 o'clock games during the week and because of the travel time on the road. So we would expect the same. We would offer the same to our visiting teams, that, you know, not to have an overabundance of 7 o'clock games during the week because of the obviously school the next day and the travel that's included in that. Create opportunities for DHS to be a host site for championship games, which our teams may not compete. Like I mentioned, now that is not permissible based on the current restrictions. We want to continue to limit the noise coming from the stadium during DHS contests, as well as support the use of the fields by the youth sports groups in town. So it was mentioned earlier that there's some recommendations that we have discussed and are ready to present tonight. So some recommendations that the board can consider and discuss that allow teams to be permitted to hold games under the lights until 8 o'clock during the week, past the 7:30 time that we currently have now, while continuing this 10 o'clock time for Fridays. That would allow us to start a weekday game at 6 o'clock, which I think is a more reasonable time to start a game. Sometimes these games, you know, whereas some games can be an hour and a half in length, others are closer to 2 hours. And so we typically will start a weekday game no later than 5:30 to ensure the lights are off by 7:30. If you expand it by 30 minutes, I think it allows us to start games at 6 o'clock during the week, which still allows students to get home at a reasonable time, but allows us to have the light take more effect and allows working families to be able to get to the games. We would ask that the restrictions be lifted to be able, the opportunity to at least host a CIAC or FCIAC playoff game. You know, for example, Norwalk High School has always hosted soccer semis and finals. You know, we could have the opportunity to host a game like that, whether we're in the game or not. And a lot of times our teams are in those games, and it would be nice if our teams are participating in those playoff games to be able to play those games on site. So, but to do so, we'd have to guarantee that we could host those games, whether a Darien High School team is involved or not. We would ask that teams can hold an additional regular season game on the lights, a total of 3. Right now, that limit is at 2, not including the playoff games, FCAC or CIC playoff games. That would include 12 games in the fall and 6 in the spring. And the practice times for DHS would still remain unchanged. I believe Dr. Adley had mentioned earlier that there is another slide. So I'm going to click over to that. So
Yeah, so this is it. I would say, thank you, Chris, that the administration as a team tried to go back to, if it is a full board goal, it may or may not be, it came from the facilities committee, to honor the spirit of the agreement while maintaining decision-making, to try and thread that needle a little bit. That may not be the board members, individual board members as a group may or may not agree with that. Our neighbors, who, by the way, have been extremely cooperative and very helpful through the process. Certainly, sure, during my tenure, I can only talk about that. And I appreciate that, actually, the discourse. But I respect that our own board would have opinions on this as others might have on it. But it's not an easy job just to thread that needle whenever you have the goal of honoring the spirit of the agreement while maintaining decision making. So we've tried to do that where we can. So this last slide was only added in lately because I was trying to get a timetable from P&Z, and they have been extremely responsive. I want to respect them in that and thank them for helping us with this. So you can see there that here we are talking about it. April 26th would suggest that we have a public discussion, not necessarily a public hearing. I think public discussion back and forth is collaborative and it invites people to have a discussion about it as opposed to just passing on their comments. The board decision would have to come to decision at May 10th. So between then, the board's going to have discussions about what this looks like, what you like, what you don't like, what you think should be in there, because the attorney would have to sort of deliberate and put the proposal together, the application together. And the deadline, not to say a deadline, but it looks like May 18th. If we wanted to have this in place for the fall, I'm not saying that is necessarily a target, but I'm proposing one target, and if it draws out because of board would like it to draw out or by processes, then that's fine. But this gets it completed before the start of the year. So the P&Z would do their public hearing on the date noted, and then a P&C decision in July. So that's potential next steps, processes. We do have Attorney Williams, who is actually on the Zoom call at the moment. Joe, I don't know if you would like to comment on anything, and I'm sure the board would have questions or otherwise, but potentially, perhaps you could just comment on the process or otherwise for the board.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me all right?
Perfect.
Well, we would need to file an application to modify the existing special permit and site plan that was granted by the P&Z Commission 5 years ago to allow use of the lights in the PA system, et cetera. And as you know, that permit contains the same conditions that were gone over tonight as was contained in the private agreement, not the private agreement, but the agreement that was signed with the neighboring property owners. So we would apply to amend some of the terms to whatever the board decides you want to seek to be amended. And it would go through the same kind of process that the application went through 5 years ago. As it says on the timing slide, you file the application, it gets assigned for a public hearing, usually about a month later. And then the hearing takes place, and we see if the P&Z Commission is comfortable closing the hearing in one night or if it needs to continue. And then the commission makes a decision on it. By state statute, the way the timing is required to work is that the Planning and Zoning Commission has to open the public hearing within 65 days after the application is received, and then close the public hearing 35 days after the hearing starts. And then after the hearing is closed, it has 65 days to make its decision. So it can take that amount of time, but the timeline that's laid out is certainly reasonable if if everything goes well.
Joe, I've gotten some questions kind of from board members, but also from the public in that, is there anything you would say that we should think about in terms of guidelines within an agreement like this pertaining to land use around planning and zoning in terms of lights and noise in a neighborhood? And is there a different way we should be distinguishing the day-to-day operational element, the scheduling of the fields, the maintenance of the fields, operating the fields? We have care, control, and custody of all these buildings. The fields, the lights, the concession stand was built by the community, basically through an incredible amount of donations through the Darien Athletic Foundation. So I think, one of the goals that's been discussed at the board table is, as we've always done, manage the day-to-day scheduling and operations of the fields. I think our goal has always been all our schools are in neighborhoods, and that's the draw to the town, is they're truly neighborhood schools, including the high school. It's dab smack in the middle of town. I'll pause there. Is there any guidance you can give us about the specific scheduling and us operating the fields versus, planning and zoning's oversight in terms of noise and lights from a neighborhood and a community standpoint in a residential area?
Well, with regard to most of what you're talking about, it's not a zoning issue, at least I don't think, unless you needed, a special permit to operate the fields or to schedule things or do the normal stuff that the board and the administration does in your sound discretion and that you're, very good at doing. So that's not really a zoning issue. I don't view it that way. I don't think it's controlled by zoning. We would only be talking about really amendments to the permit that specifically regulates the use of the fields when the lights are on. And there, the commission, P&Z commission applies some pretty broad criteria about whether the location and the intensity of the use is going to hinder or discourage appropriate development or impair property values of the properties nearby. Basically looking at an overall reasonableness standards, suitability, appropriateness to the neighborhood. So I don't think it needs to change much in regard to the scheduling and the overall operation. It's just a matter of, will the changes that we may propose to the terms as to how long the lights can be on at night, how many games can be lit, do those fall within the standards, fairly broad standards that the P&Z Commission looks at?
Okay. Thank you. I'll open up to board questions. Mrs. Ockman.
So I have a question on process here. I will have a board discussion tonight. In terms of a public discussion, I guess I'm asking what's before the board. The question before the board that I'm aware of is that, do we make an application to P&Z? I'm not entirely sure the public can inform that decision. What I want to veer away from, to be completely honest, as the policy chair, is getting into a public discussion on stipulations or how many games or times. That's an administrative regulation. We didn't do it before. I don't think we're in it now. The administration can hold that with the public if there's a concern and report back to the board. But I just want to make sure we make really clear the public discussion, as I understand it, is, are we going back to make an application for changes? Did I say that right? I think, John, did I say that right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so what I don't want to get into a discussion is, well, I think it should be 6 games and I think it should be 7. And we don't do that. That's not our job.
I think the goal is we will confirm with Mr. Mooney a public discussion or public hearing. I think the important thing is, now that we have the opportunity to further discuss that, is that we hear from the public on their thoughts around the use of the stadium lights. And it's been good. From a community standpoint, it'll be the standard. They have 3 minutes discussion. I'll clarify public discussion versus public hearing. I think as a board, we've always kind of struggled with wanting to respond to certain things if they're inappropriate or inaccurate. So it's really a placeholder, and I'll get some clarity around that. But to your point, the goal is for the board to have a conversation of any changes that they want to look at and discuss that would go into that application to amend that planning and zoning special permit.
Okay, so again, from a policy standpoint, and this is what hat I have on now, this board has never taken a policy vote, nor do we have governed any governing rules around those regulations. The entity of Darien Board of Education entered into a contract signed by the superintendent and the neighbors, and we have honored that contract. So I just would like to make clear to the public that whatever that ends up looking like, we're not going to have a discussion on. I think it should be soccer versus, field hockey versus 6 o'clock or 8 o'clock, unless we choose to make a policy. And then that would be the first time the Board of Education is entering policy into usage.
So I just want to sort of talk to the difference between the two. The public hearing is really just one dimensional in many ways, right? You don't have an opportunity.
Public comment.
Or sorry, public comment. It's one dimensional, and we don't actually respond or otherwise. I'm not suggesting we get into a whole dialogue back and forth, but it's a wee bit more inclusive and a wee bit more collaborative. It gives the community, whatever constituents they happen to be, at least to put on the table some of the bigger issues that they would want the board to consider. So that's essentially the only difference that they're. I'm not suggesting everything will be a dialogue. The board doesn't have to go into full dialogue with anyone, but as long as people have had their say and they've heard what the issues to be considered, then that's really the only difference. There is really no other difference between the public discussion.
I guess I'm arguing, and then I'll let Mr. Sweeney go. I'm pointing out something different. The question before the Board of Education is, are we going back and are we refiling?
Yes.
That's the question before the Board of Education. So as long as the public knows, we can enter into a dialogue on that. But the rest of it really isn't. It's an administration.
Mr. Sini or Mr. Brown? Well, Mr. Sini had your hand up first.
Thank you. Chris, I just had a question from the slide in your comments earlier. You mentioned that it says in the slide, DHS may host FCIAC and SEAC playoff games that do not involve DHS. You had mentioned sort of like the excitement that comes around game day when DHS is playing. Wouldn't those be the games we'd really want to host when DHS makes the playoffs?
Right. So any game that we are the higher seed and we are hosting a playoff game, we are permitted to hold under the lights.
So I'm just confused with the slide. So we would be able to host under the lights, or we would
So
not?
what I'm referring to in the slide is there are, for example, there are FCIAC semifinal games held in the sport of field hockey that are predetermined that those games will be held at, let's just say again, Brian McMahon High School. Brian McMahon High School hosts those games, whether their team's involved or not.
Okay.
Right now, we, Darien, could not have the opportunity to host those games because we can't guarantee the FCIAC that if Darien High School is not playing, we can't turn the lights on. So therefore, we don't give the opportunity to even host those games.
So we're looking to be a potential host stadium. for one of those
Understood.
games.
Right.
Okay, thank you for the clarity. And then just looking at the time limits you have here in the proposals, is there any educational or athletic reason why we would limit it, say, 8 o'clock versus 8:30 or 9 o'clock? I mean, are these fairly arbitrary based
Again,
on what we had in the old agreement, or are there actual underlying reasons why we would want to adhere to these times?
Yeah, someone used the term earlier, thread the needle. It's thread the needle about what time you want to play a game on a Tuesday night, when the school next day versus, versus 4 o'clock. So, 7 o'clock, when you're playing a team in Danbury on a Tuesday, that's a late night. Yeah. But 6 o'clock I think is more reasonable. So I think again, it's that opportunity to play a little bit later, but still.
So if we take away the question of what past agreements existed, if we're just looking at flexibility to do the games and everything, there's no purpose to these limits per se, if we just look at it separate.
Again, I think it's just a matter of keeping the time late enough to play a night game and allow parents to come to be able to view, but not get kids home too late in the school night.
I think we're trying to be just reasonable with it, not have the kids out all night if possible, like or late.
And I just
Go ahead, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Chris. I just had one for Attorney Williams. Just look at the situation here and the scope of the agreement that was previously in place and looking, and I'm just trying to think this through as a board member and someone who's not around for the earlier discussions. I see this really as sort of a coming to the nuisance issue here. And, it seems reasonable to have lights at a field where you have sports teams. Seems very reasonable. You'd want to use those lights or any facilities to the fullest extent possible to the benefit of our students. And just thinking here as a board member, when I look to my duties to the students and members of the community both, but to our athletes, why wouldn't I want to have the fullest possible usage of all facilities at all times under our control?
Well, I'm sure you would, and I don't blame you. But we're dealing with an existing permit that has certain limits on it. So then the question that'll have to go to the commission is, should certain of them be lifted entirely, and then they need to apply, the standards under their regulations to each one of those? Well, is this too intense? Is it appropriate? Does it harm property values? Is it unfair to the neighbors' use of their property? But if the board's preference and the proposal is lift the limit altogether, then we can present that, and we just need to persuade the Planning and Zoning Commission that it meets with their standards.
Thank you.
Mr. Sini.
Okay, just for the next meeting, can we get the Planning and Zoning Commission adopted resolution January 17, 2017 document distributed as part of our packet?
Yeah.
Two, as a point of fact, we were told earlier that it was only a special permit regulation and it was an administrative role of P and Z. That is a false fact. It is not true. If you look on that document, it says proposed amendments to the Darien zoning regulations, COZR 10-2016, and there was an amendment, legislative action of the commission at the time to section 405B. So the reason I bring this up is that this is going to be important based on what the administration just brought us, because there is a limitation in the regulation that oversees a special permit that the lights can only be used to accommodate town or school athletic or related activities or town nonprofit organizations, athletic activities. So this board, to Mrs. Achman's question, these aren't just policies set by the board. These are written into our zoning regulations. So we as a board, as our role as liaisons with the community, are trying to help the administration, one, untangle ourselves from an agreement, two, reach the goals that the administration has presented us with, and three, hear from the community in the use of light. So that's, as I see it, the role of the board here. So I do want to, it's very complicated how this was written in. It is unprecedented to the detail in the special permit that we're written in. So Duke, to your point, I think it's very clear. Let's go back to letting the zoning, P and Z have its say on land use related to what its regulations are. So we as a board, hearing community input, hearing administrative input, can go back to the administration and just give them times of use that we would recommend to go to the Planning and Zoning Commission for amendment. And that would be, I think, suffice. And then when these zoning regs are eliminated, then it goes back to the administration managing the policy. We have actually field use policies that this is incongruent with. So that, again, and I do want to go back to another statement that was made from the public. It was bilateral. There was no consultation with the commission, with the Planning and Zoning Department, or the town attorney, or the first selectman at the time about this agreement. It popped out from the board and through the superintendent. Okay, so I just
From the
wanted to,
super.
I'm sorry,
From the super.
from the super who was enabled by the board.
Thank you, Mr.
So that, I just want to make that clear.
Can I just clarify something? Sorry, I just want to clarify something in the, and it had been mentioned this evening that one of the biggest concerns is actually potentially not the lights, because the lights are really efficient and do a super job from a pollution point of view. It's the noise. And I say this very, very respectfully to everyone, including our guests this evening, that it's a high school. It's really a tough thing to manage, and we're trying to manage as best we can, but it is a high school, and part of the high school experience is sound and the mechanics of that. And I understand that it flows over. It's just a hard thing to manage. So while it's potentially one of the greatest concerns for our community members, it's one of the hardest things for us to manage. So I'll just leave that at that. For
Just one last point to one question to Joe. Joe, as I understand it, schools exist as of right or can use their facilities as of right. Like the general operations of a school do not need special permit approval. I think you touched upon that, but can you confirm that as well?
I'm a little reluctant just to say it as a general matter because there are plenty of town, and I haven't looked for this in Darien, but there are plenty of towns where you do need a permit to conduct an educational use in certain zones.
Could you come back to us with that then when you have the answer?
Sure.
Thank you.
This is Parent.
I was just gonna, before we got into the zoning, if we were to host the FCAC or CS that we were not participating in, how does that expense of that get handled? Do we take on that expense to the ticket sales from that event? How does that work?
No, so we take on no expense. All our expenses are paid. The league keeps the gate receipts, but there's no expense to the district.
Okay.
Mrs. Worm.
Just actually.
Your mic.
You had mentioned that you wanted to limit the noise. Do you have a plan for that? How is that happening? You had it in your slide.
To Dr. Adley's point,
mentioned that we can't do much about the noise.
we do our best to limit the noise. It is a high school campus and there are PA announcers and bands and whistles. And so we do our best, but those things happen whether the game's at 4 o'clock or 7 o'clock. So we do our best to limit the noise and control the sound system volume, but
And then also, what was, so 5:30 to 6, what is the benefit of that half hour start time? Just
yeah,
curious.
again, it gives, I think, an extra half an hour for parents who may be out of town working to get back onto campus to watch their children play.
Mrs. Parent.
I was just building off the time thing. I very much appreciate that you kept the time the 6 and not pushed it later, because in my view, these children are student athletes and they're students first. And I think having them home at a decent hour to get schoolwork done and proper rest is important. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Mrs. Best.
Thank you. I would imagine if we are able to keep the lights on later, we're kind of creating space. We're creating time where time didn't exist before. I would love to understand either tonight or at our next discussion, what opportunities that creates for other students, for other programs, for an intramural, something to pop up, for an extra freshman team of some sort that we didn't have field space for. What kinds of things we might be able to do if we can find those pockets of time.
I mean, look, we're fortunate in Darien. We have so many fields on the campus that we do meet the needs of the teams that we have in terms of the space we have, whether it's the high school, we do use the middle school fields as well. So there could be opportunities though. But I think that the our current facilities is we're fortunate for what we have, what we use, and we have access to.
Mrs. Allen.
I think Mr. Maroney was before me.
Sorry,
And
Dennis.
then I'll go.
Mr. Maroney.
Chris, question on hosting the FCAC or SEAC semifinals and finals. So you mentioned you're talking about having 12 fall games. So let's say you hosted the girls soccer tournament. Would that be 3 games or would you count it as 2? And would that subtract from the 12 or?
No, so
would it add to the 12?
The 12 is what you see is for regular season. And in addition to that are the playoffs. And
Okay.
sometimes we're fortunate to host a playoff game. We've had some really exciting playoff games in that field at night. And but to the point of hosting a semifinal game where it's predetermined, it wouldn't count towards those numbers you see in the slide.
Okay.
Mrs. Ahmed.
So to an earlier point, I think, or to Mr. Sini's point, once we untangle the land use restrictions, because I agree, we have to get that out of the P and Z. What I want as a board, and we're starting to see it here, right? Mrs. Parent, I'm going to pick on you only because I can. Like you think 7's okay. Someone else might think it's 8 okay. What I'd like is to take the board out of that. Let the educators make decisions. Let parents make the decisions that are right for their children and do it that way. I will put my cards on the table. I think this agreement is overly restrictive. And part of what we then run into is we don't have educators making the decisions. I would like to be respectful. I would hope we could find a way to be respectful without a contract I live across the street from a church that starts singing at 7:30 in the morning. We're very respectful, but that's where my house is, right? So, but they are respectful. Our relationship is respectful. I would hope we could engender the same thing. What I saw from 2008 on often is that this board got involved in, I think it should be this tall. I think there should be, yellow uniforms. I think there should be, that was non-productive. I think we should treat it like every other program at the high school. We approved lights. Now let the administration do their job. If there's a problem that needs to come back to us, let us know. And then if we need to get our hands in it, we can. The land use is P and Z. We let P and Z do their job. We do our job. Noise ordinances, wherever they might be at this point. At one point there were none. I don't know if there are. I don't want to speak out of turn. That's P and Z's. Being respectful is ours. So that's where I'm landing on, like, I don't want to make policy that the board doesn't need to have its hands into, because policy is a really blunt instrument and we're seeing it. I mean, effectively the contract is policy and we're seeing the effects of a blunt instrument. So I'm suggesting in this iteration, we do it better.
Thank you. Mr. Brown.
So following up that, Tara, I was trying to get to the point earlier that the limiting principle we should have is what P and Z tells us. Otherwise, we should push to the maximum. It sounds like you're saying the same thing.
Yeah, on land use. And if the administration has a limitation that it recommends to the board, we can be aware of it, just like they do administratively all day long, right? I think we're synced up.
Okay.
Yep. Good. Mr. Maroney.
I would just like to echo Mrs. Ackman in that I think having a public discussion gets messy. I don't understand how we just don't treat ourselves as an applicant. And then the discussion happens at planning and zoning, and that's where the discussion has. It's not our discussion. We're just submitting an application to the Planning and Zoning Commission. So I'm not sure where we end up with a discussion there.
Mr. Senior.
I would just, to get public input for those who want to have it say on, hey, we just heard it this evening from a couple speakers. This time would work for us. So just to get input and be able to ask them questions. Why this time? Why that time? Why this restriction? Why that restriction? Public comment, we can't go back and forth. We can have that discussion another time, but that's the reason, Dennis.
Mrs. McCammon.
Duke, I think you asked this question, but I want to ask it again of Attorney Williams. In terms of, do you have sort of a recommendation of what's best in class for a Board of Education to go to P and Z with? And is that something you could provide us? I think, certainly we want to respect the needs of everyone that we're speaking with, but oftentimes there's sort of a strongly recommended legal channel or way of wording things. Do you have that you could provide to us?
Do you mean for these specific terms, like how many games or what time the lights go off? Do you mean that kind of thing?
No, I actually would agree with all of my colleagues that I would like to separate out the application to P and Z, which I would consider a land use discussion, from operational decisions, which would have to do with the number of games and who's playing them, et cetera. So what I'm looking for is, what is your recommendation for the most appropriate application from a Board of Education to a P and Z?
Well, usually you don't have the operation of high school fields, being restricted by special permit. But as I said before, we're starting off in the situation where there is a special permit. The zoning regulations, as you heard, were amended to allow light poles at this height, in certain circumstances, and require that there be a special permit. So I couldn't say to you that there's a best in class sort of standard, but I would say it's less typical that you have a special permit in place for this kind of thing. But that's sort of a moot point, I guess, is what I'm getting at, because you needed to get the permit under the regulations. We do have a permit, and so to make changes to it, you have to apply to change it. As I said earlier, though, it doesn't mean you can't ask that certain limitations be removed entirely, and it just become something for the board and the administration to sort of regulate over time.
Go ahead, Mrs. McCammon.
Chris or Attorney Williams or Alan, do we have any information about the districts that have restrictions, Greenwich and Staples. Do they have the same kind of technology that we do? Do we know why they have restrictions in place?
I don't know what technology they have. I think Greenwich lights are a little older than Staples, though. I know Staples, having worked in that district, is in a more residential neighborhood like Darien High School is. I don't know why Greenwich has the restrictions they do. Assuming it has something to do with residential, surroundings as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Sini.
I have some input there. Greenwich is in a lifelong standstill agreement. I was involved in doing early research on the lights, and we were told not to think about a standstill agreement, actually. I do know that the lights aren't LED there. I don't believe they're LED. I know they're, well, last time I was at Staples, they're not LED there.
Thank you.
So am I hearing, to kind of recap from the board, I think good discussion, good feedback from everyone, but we want to stay out of kind of the administrative management and operations of the field, but want to organize our thoughts around an application to planning and zoning around the special permit and the changes that need to be done associated with the special permit and the regs that have changed tied to that. Does that make sense in terms of direction of the board? Okay. Does that make sense? Joe?
Yes, and can I add one thing to answer the question from board member? I think it was Sini. You had asked me a moment ago, and I was able to look it up. And you're correct, because the school is in the R2 zone where public schools are permitted principal use as of right. I think that's what you're asking me.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just get clarification from the board because of what it wants to do at the next regular meeting in terms of this public discussion or not? I'm trying to be inclusive. I'm trying to thread the needle of honor and spirit. This is an unusual situation. I'm trying to work with the community so that the board hears the community. I'd like the board to give me specific recommendations of what it wants to do. The board put this on the agenda. My best recommendation is to be inclusive, have that opportunity. But if it doesn't want to do that, you need to tell me that or what you would like to
So
do.
I don't think personally, that's not like my favorite way to characterize it. This board, I think, is always inclusive. The question is, when the public comes before the board, they're expecting the board to have input. So if you want us involved in the administrative regulations around the field, then I would have people come to the board meeting and we'll get involved with it. If you think that's an administrative duty, which is how I see how programs are run, I would direct the public to have a conversation with you. But I think I think Mr. Maroney and I are worried that we are inviting board discussion on matters that, unless you want us to dictate, we can legislate, we can choose to, but they feel operational to me. I don't know when the best time to start a game is. Like, I could tell you 3 different kids, 3 different times that I would say is the good time for their last game. But it seems subjective to me from a board standpoint. But I don't think that's because I don't want to be inclusive or I don't want to hear from the public. I'm just asking, what is my role in that discussion?
Well, I think a component of it can be to listen, because I think the public and a lot of new folks in town are being educated that this agreement is even in place, or there's an opportunity now to look at this agreement. I think people have enjoyed the feel so much and the community activities that have gone up there. But to that point, it's kind of like, does the board want to be really clear as to what we're listening to or what we're educating them on initially, and making it very clear as to what we're doing with planning and zoning, and that their real opportunity will also be at a planning and zoning public hearing. I mean, I kind of look at it 2 ways there. I understand you don't want to all of a sudden have the public once again looking for the board to make a decision or the board to set the operational or administrative timelines and guidelines when it truly is at an administrative level.
And P and Z, my guess, is going to say, talk to us about land use, don't talk to us about game times. So I am concerned that we're clear with the public about it. I won't oppose it, but I am concerned. I would say that let's please be crystal clear on what our role is that night if we do it. And other board members might feel differently.
I agree. I just think I think it's important that in what we've done in the past, I think it's important to let the public be heard. But I think what we need to do is tee it up and educate the public as to what their opportunity is at this meeting. And it's really us just listening, and they need to take it to the next level to planning and zoning once the permit goes to planning and zoning. Go ahead. Mr. Smith.
Yeah, all I want to hear is a formulation of a permit. What times do they want to use? I mean, and we can very much make it clear, Mr. Chairman, we're not here to discuss how many games per team and, as I call it, all the guts of this agreement that we want to clean out of the
We make
regulation.
it, we kind of define our role as to how we're moving forward, but as always, we'll hear from the public.
And hopefully the issues are not mutually exclusive. That doesn't mean that an administrative can't then make the recommendation or decision once they hear from the public. Just
All right. So we'll move forward in that timeline, but we'll also move forward with working with planning and zoning. Anything else?
Attorney Williams,
ahead.
do you have any recommendations for how we queue up that discussion to make it as optimal as possible?
Before the Board of Ed, that discussion, you mean?
Yes.
No, because it's not a mandatory thing. It's not a public hearing. You don't have any standard governing it. It is, I think, as Dr. Adley put it, it's more of a community discussion and the way the chairman put it, an opportunity to hear from the public, and you can have some give and take a little bit if you choose to do it. But it's probably a good idea, at least to start with maybe Dr. Adley and or Mr. Manfredonia, just talking about what the experience has been. I think it's important for the public to hear, that things generally have gone well in regard to the usage of the PA system and the lighting system and not having a lot of conflict or complaints. That's my understanding of what has been the case. So putting that out there and talking about how, in my opinion, really fairly minor the changes are that we're talking about making to the times and things, but then to just hear from people about what needs there are for the changes. You heard from some of those folks tonight. I think that should be part of it. And then offer the opportunity for folks to talk about if they have concerns or other parts of it they want to have changed. Those are the things that if I were doing it, I would want to draw out.
So is it more that through the Board of Ed, we make it very clear our role as the board, but it is the administration presenting at the board meeting where they're going administratively with changes they want to make?
I'll just say we're going to be the applicant on the
Yep.
board
Yep.
on with P and Z too. So again, we do have a role here, but let's stay away from the.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments?
oh, sorry, we have. I was going to actually pull you in to see if you have a question. So if anybody have a
I do
question,
actually have a question. Is there any restriction involving specific noise ordinances about the time at which certain decibel levels are put into place at places such as the high school? So at 8 o'clock, does something cut in across town that at all townwide places, there must be noise below some threshold?
I believe it's the decibels, but not time wise.
Okay, so
I'm sorry. There is a time limit when it's considered quiet hours and then noise level needs to go down in a residential area. That's a great question. It is 10 PM. So you're honoring that even with the Friday night right now.
yeah, so we're well within the time frame to be able to extend it. And I think Mr. Manfredonia had proposed half an hour, which is certainly within that restriction.
It's correct.
Thank you, John.
What was the time, Attorney Williams? I missed that.
10 PM.
Okay. You need anything else?
No, sir.
All right, good. Thank you for the
Thank
comments
you.
and the questions.
Thank
and
you,
the
Joe.
conversation.
Much appreciated. Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Seaman.
Mayor.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it. We'll move on to a quick update on the status of schools.
I'll do a wee check to see if Alicia is there. I know she was going to discuss it, but if she's not, I'll do it. Alicia, are you there? Okay.
Oh, no, Alicia's not on.
She's not on, okay, all right. She is on or no?
She was, but.
Okay, all right, dropped off, all right.
Dr.
that's fine.
Adley?
Yes?
Alicia provided us a statement when you're ready for that in terms of an update that Marge and I can share with you.
Okay. You can Go ahead,
Whenever you're
and-
ready.
you can go ahead and give it right now.
Bigger font. on your sheet.
Thank you, Chris.
I have, I have. Alicia apologizes. Alicia had apologized, Dr. Adley, she was staying on, but she did want to share the update. COVID cases continue to be reported. Epidemiologists are predicting and expecting an increase in cases over the next month. We do not anticipate changes in current levels of mitigation, and it remains important for those with symptoms of COVID, even mild symptoms, to stay home, test, and follow current protocols. Next week, we are expecting an increase in travel of families, students, and a message went out today offering test kits to any family or staff member who would like a kit or kits. Any interested families, please contact the nurse at their school and arrange for kit pickups. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley.
So thank you, Shirley. This metric, all we're doing is reporting metrics at this particular point. Yes, as Alicia just shared, we will have available kits for anybody for traveling, should they wish to use those and when they come back. This is the first time in 5 reports that the down cases have gone up. Last report was a 31, 77, 102, and 125. Now we went from 31 up to 51. And the rate per 100,000 has gone up to 16.8 from 10.2. So this is the first time that we've seen an increase. That's Dr. Kennefic also, everybody does not find that necessarily surprising. But the reality is we're living to cope with it. And hopefully people can avail themselves of some of the testing. This is an example of sort of how it slowed down a little bit. So it was 27, and you can see it's more or less the same at this particular bit. So our cases have sort of slowed down. When you look at the week at 27, then you've got 23 and 3. So you're pretty much 27 has been consistent. The monthly reports. So the slowdown has slowed down a wee bit. This is right from the time, and then the weekly report. So you can see there's just a slight increase, and it's expected to continue to some degree. But other than that, there really is no other report. We're up and running. We're moving forward, and we're dealing with the issues as they come up, and people are being respectful if there are cases of how to handle those, and are doing the appropriate intervention that they have to do.
Questions or comments? Good. Thank you, Dr. Adley. We'll continue to be safe, and I hope everyone continues to be safe and tests through the holidays if they're traveling. We'll move on to an update on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Dr. Christopher Tranberg.
Good evening, everyone. The update's a little bit longer, and in part, this isn't all new stuff related to DEI. We're able to return to some events that used to happen in the past that we are doing again. So things like author visits are happening. And the good thing about author visits, it's one of the learnings from COVID, is it's a lot cheaper to have an author visit when you're not bringing them to campus. So we've been able to do more of them and have students meet more authors. So that's been great. So that's happening at Henley, and Tokenique's big passport around the world event returned, and to rave reviews. There are some pictures up there, and there are many more pictures if you'd like to see them. You're going to see throughout references to equity networks. That's just an extension of the DEI team. So all members of the DEI team were asked to form a network. That's 5 people that are in their lives that they can have conversations about what's happening at the meetings with and participate in a dialogue. So a lot of principals are using their faculty meetings as an extension and creating a network that way. The middle school, the last report we talked about partnering with the Darien Public Library for a book club. That has continued. Andrew Turiago, who's one of our very talented 6th grade English teachers, is actually facilitating that. The book that they selected is Ain't So Awful Falafel. I'm reading it myself right now, so that is starting soon, and I'm a falafel fan. I just want to make sure that's on the record. With the high school, Mr. Shelton was here since the last update, and he worked with middle school students and high school students. They did a similar activity, and John actually captured the other update that I wanted to share about the training with the ADL that will be in place for the April training for the freshman class. A really exciting event is the Blues and Beyond. You might remember the MPA co-sponsored this activity for this group to come in and work with social studies and our music classes on understanding African-American history and music and the crosswalk between those two disciplines. And it ended in this concert, and you see the picture of kids standing on their feet, and they were standing on their feet as if they were at a rock concert. It was just tremendous. The musicians were great. Colleen Thompson, our director of music, also appeared on stage. To my surprise, they heard her kind of singing off stage, and then they made her backup singer. So that was a nice bonus to that event. There's a YouTube link if you haven't had a chance to click on it. Students actually wrote their own blues lyrics, and professional musicians set them. So you can hear our students' lyrics performed by some professional musicians, which was a great event as well. And there's also our DEI team. We've had 2 meetings. We have 3 meetings left to go, and we are working I think we're on pace for our year 1 deliverables with our equity statement, trying to complete the equity audit so we can find the places that we really want to focus our work next year. And our professional development for staff also continues. Mr. Shelton he worked with smaller groups of staff last time, including the middle school team leaders and administrators. He did some one-on-one conversations as well. So things are moving along, I would say, very nicely. And I'll gladly address any questions.
Mrs. Parent.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick questions. It's Mr. Shelton met with a group of students at Middlesex. How were those students chosen?
This was the same group of students that he met with, I think it was in November. So it's that group. There's not been great consistency because students don't love missing class. So that's been with the model that we have in place, that's been hard. And that's why the ADL piece was a little bit more successful. The training was in the evenings. So that's just food for thought moving forward. But the students opted in, and it was students who said that they wanted to be part of it at the middle school.
And similarly, it says that Mr. Shelton met virtually with coaches. Was that all coaches? Was that mandatory for all coaches, or was that an opt-in?
It was actually intended to be an opt-in, but I believe Mr. Manfredonia required all coaches to do it.
Okay.
So that was a bonus.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Mrs. Best.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tramberg. I think I say this every time, but I'm going to say it one more time. I love the links to all of the previous documents. It's wonderful to have the live links right there for anyone who wants to refer back. And I think it's a great template that we might want to think about for any other topics that we revisit regularly to make it easier for people to follow along or to catch themselves up if needed. I was just curious, I feel like I should probably know this, but in the Holmes update, it mentioned that the students used windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. Could you just explain a little bit what that is?
Sure. So windows and mirrors is the original term, and it started 88, 90, I think is when that language started. And so it's about using literature. And when you're talking about windows, it's how students look out at the world around them, and mirrors, it's how they reflect and relate to what's happening in the story. And more recently, sliding glass doors is kind of like you think it's how can you walk into the story, empathize, relate to the character in the situation. So it's often used in especially children's literature when talking about children's literature.
Mrs.
What's the process for syncing up what like student needs? So how are we identifying if we're doing all this DEI work? Is it actually hitting our students' needs? Or because what I would hate to do is say, oh, we hit our goals, and the students be like, you haven't hit anything I was concerned about. So can you just tell us how we're doing that sync to make sure the work that we're focused on, it might go past student need, but are we at least kind of meeting those immediate concerns?
So hopefully we're starting to meet the immediate by working with students in all of the different settings that we are. So whether it's the ADL or whether it's these groups with Mr. Shelton. But what is to come with the data that we're looking at 4 different areas. That's part of how you look at equity data and coming up with specific questions related to each of those topics. And that's where we would set metrics, for lack of a better word, so we can see if we're making the progress that we want to make.
Okay.
So right now we are trying to meet the immediate needs through everything we're doing. Right now it feels a bit like a potpourri, but we're funneling. So we started wide and we're narrowing in on where we really want to focus.
And just super quickly, if Mr. Shelton met with coaches once, I imagine, he's meeting with our teachers and students multiple times. Are there plans to revisit that? Like a one and done doesn't really seem
No,
DEI to me.
It doesn't. So we have him here 3 more times. So we're going to try to get him repeated visits with the same group is the most effective thing to do. So that's how we're designing the rest of the year for sure.
Okay, great.
Mrs. McCammon.
I'd like to know how we're engaging our students with disabilities, those who are particularly disabled and probably wouldn't have extra time to volunteer or even know that that was an option, but who do inherently struggle with difference, both in any explicit work with that population.
So I would say explicit, not yet. The way that, because of the challenges we're facing of time and students not necessarily wanting to miss class in order to engage in the work, which I understand. Now that we have things up and running and we're going to have more specific goals, we'll have a chance to reassess and identify, well, where are our areas of focus? And do we in fact have representation of those students in the groups that we're actually trying to make a difference for, so we can get to authentic experiences to do that. So even if they're not in the group, the next opportunity would be being part of networks. And then after that, when you actually identify what the goals are and you're trying to get to the root cause, doing the root cause analysis, I think it was September. It was September 10th. I did the root cause analysis picture. That's working with the students. So if we see that there is something we're focusing on with students with learning differences, and we see there's 30 students in that population that aren't meeting a target, it becomes the goal of us to talk to 30 students and get to their story. So the important part of this work is representation, and you want to represent the people that are being affected and not in a performative way.
I do know that there were students of receiving support services who were in the initial group at the high school level.
Yeah, and definitely at the middle school as well.
Mrs. Worm.
I think.
Oh, sorry, Mrs. McCammon.
I think Shirley was going to add. I'd just like to hear from.
Thank you. I just wanted to add to, in addition, the students that are in the DEI groups really speak as ambassadors on behalf of other students. So I've been in groups with 2 different students, and they really do bring up what they bring to working with other students and how students they work with and been friends with, going through years and years of school with, how they represent them in our conversations. So although they may not be students with learning differences necessarily in our groups, their peers and their friends for many, many years are representing their lens and their point of view. And it's come up on several occasions. So that's really important to embrace also.
Okay. If I could just, thank you. If I could just add to it, a lot of times these are the kids who need very individualized instruction. And so I hope that we'll keep that in mind, that they need additional handholding to access the materials. It has to be often cyclical, but it is something that's profoundly important, I think, to them and to their community. So I understand, I hear you. I'm just going to reiterate.
No, and I appreciate that. And just because there might be a lack of student representation, it doesn't mean there's lack of that concern and that perspective and that lens. So on the DEI committee alone, you have Mrs. Klein, Dr. McCarthy, you have parents that are there with that lens. And I think even though when you look at the group, it doesn't look like, oh my goodness, this is a racially diverse group of people. It is a diverse group of perspectives as the group is coming to learn, but based on who's in the room and what they bring.
Okay. But may I add one more thing to that? I think also the outcomes, as Dr. Tramberg was saying, that we're going to bring to the board of, let's say, the 4 targeted areas we're really looking at as outcomes. Just with all our teaching and learning, that will be differentiated and presented in different modalities so everyone gets what we're learning. And I think that was your question. To your point, Jill, we'll make sure that that is the purpose of what we're doing. So it will be translated into many different access points. for all our learners.
Thank you.
Mrs. Warren.
So I'm curious about in these small groups of students that you're meeting with, or that Mr. Shelton is meeting with, about how many, because you said trying to meet with the same groups, about how many has he met with? You know, are we talking 5 kids? Are we talking 40?
At the middle school, was about 3 dozen. I think it was about 36 to 40. It was a little smaller the second time. At the high school, because the schedule was such a concern, instead of meeting with them for the extent of a full day, which was the original design, he repeated the offering one day for AM classes and the next day for PM. So he caught 2 groups from the first one, but they met for less time. And so there were smaller groups. So he might have had a dozen on the first day and maybe 8 on the second day.
Thank you.
Mrs. McCann.
One more question. Looking at the networks, what is the model you're employing there? Is it sort of a train the trainer kind of model? What are you doing with the networks beyond just creating connections?
So the purpose of the networks where we are now is that everyone's practicing having conversations. Part of the work that's so challenging is how do we have difficult conversations that we're not used to having? So they're given a prompt or an activity to do, and so we practice it together with their table groups, and then they have to duplicate that activity and try to engage in the conversation, and they come back and talk about it. As the group goes on, the task becomes more challenging. But right now it's just the general practice, because it does feel artificial for some people. You don't typically go to people that you know and say, here, let's have the shared experience together and talk about it. I mean, we do, but we don't do it in a structured way that way. So we're practicing that now. And the network is just as like social network analysis is a big focus in research right now. So if every person on the team talks to 5 people and each of those people talks to 5 people, that's how we can open up communication in the community.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I don't know if Olivia or John have a question or comment or. That's okay. Thank you. You don't have to.
Just
You
if you-
certainly don't
I-
have to.
I keep looking over, but just raise your hand like everyone else. Olivia?
The only thing I would want to say is, as a high schooler myself, I know you spoke about how missing classes and high school scheduling is particularly difficult. But another concern that I've heard with students in terms of diversity and equity and inclusion is that only the students who are being exposed to programs like working with Ken Shelton are only the students who are opting in to take time out of their day and do so. And one of the major problems in DHS is that this education isn't widespread. And so the majority of our student body is not receiving the same information when it comes to diversity education. And oftentimes the students who spend the least amount of time educating themselves are the ones who receive the least amount of education. So I think I realize it's difficult because taking time out of a high schooler day, like personally, I'm in the middle of AP tests. If I was told I had to miss an entire day of class, I would have a little bit of a freak out. So it can be extremely difficult, but I think trying to make education more widespread as a general rule, instead of focusing on specific small groups of students who volunteer their time, could be important.
Thank you, Olivia. Any other board questions or comments? All right. Thank you, Chris. We had an item, further discussion on FY23 budget. That had to do with the outcome of last night's meeting, if there was anything further we needed to discuss. So at last night's Board of Finance meeting, our budget was approved at $110,607,016, a 3.74% increase, an increase year over year of $3,982,817. Our capital budget was approved for $2,821,477. There might be a $62,000 change to that, as we have an item around working with the Board of Finance to move forward a purchase of a Suburban. That would be the most impactful dollars and cents and transportation wise if we could move that along in the current supply chain issues. So I just wanted to take time to thank the administration, the cabinet, all the teachers, and all the leadership in the local schools for all the hard work on organizing and putting together a budget. Thank you to the board for all the hard work the board does going through the budget process. Thanks to the partnership with the Board of Finance and working with the Board of Finance, a lot of answering of questions back and forth. I know RTM F&B is meeting this evening. I spoke to Jack earlier. And I believe RTM Education also met this week. So thank you to them also for their partnerships and working with us. I think, as always, there are lessons learned through this process, and there are probably more efficient ways to do it in terms of people's time and energy and answering questions and organizing information. But I think we moved through and proposed a really fiscally sound budget that really provides the education in a high-performing district that we've all come to know. And I think on the capital side, we continue to maintain our buildings. And as everyone knows, we have several building projects ongoing. So I'll pause there. Dr. Adley, anything you want to add?
No, I want to thank the members of the community, the board for their guidance and counsel and input, and the Board of Finance for their support also.
Yeah, and thank you to CDSP and CPAC and all the organizations and parent organization and PTO that come out and speak and support the budget process. Thank you very much. Board comments or questions? We move on to the RTM process. Great. We'll move on to discussion and potential action. Board of Finance appropriation request to purchase the Suburban vehicle included in the fiscal 23 capital budget request.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure, unless I missed it, I don't think we made a motion to amend this because there's no action on it. As it's currently described, there's no action. That's my oversight. But I would suggest that if we make a motion to change it, please.
Can we make a motion to amend Section 8E to discussion and possible action on Board of Finance appropriation request to purchase the Suburban vehicle included in the fiscal 23 capital year budget? Mrs. Ackman, second by Mrs. McCammon. All those in favor? Great. Any discussion around that? Yes.
Just a quick question. Do we have any idea of getting the Suburban 2 months earlier, whatever this might do, what kind of savings that gives us?
I don't think it's necessarily a savings. It's a hope that, given how long it's taken to get vehicles in general, that if we are able to order a vehicle 2 months earlier, we'll actually get it in time for the start of school. If we don't get it in the start of the school year, we'll probably, if it was similar to this year where we didn't get it until Thanksgiving, it costs us probably about $20,000.
Thanks.
Thank you. I have a motion to request a special appropriation from the Board of Finance in the amount of $62,000 to fund the pre-purchase of the Chevy Suburban for out-of-district transportation, reducing the Board of Ed capital budget from $2,821,477 to $2,759,477. Mrs. Ackman, second by Mrs. Best. All those in favor? That is unanimous with John out and Dave Brown not here right this second. Thank you all. We'll go on to 8F, first reading and discussion on proposed revisions to Board of Education Policy Series 2000 Administration, 2100 Goals of Administrative Body, 2210 Duties of the Superintendent, 2220 Recruitment and Appointment of the Superintendent of Schools, 2230 Superintendent's Contract, 2240 Superintendent of Schools Opportunities for Development, 2250 Superintendent of Schools Evaluation, 2260 Unavailability of the Superintendent, 2310 Administrative Team, 2410 Dissemination and Implementation of Policies and Administrative Regulations, 2420 Uniform Treatment of Recruiters, 2610 Annual Report of the School District. I will turn it over to Mrs. Ackman and Ms. Sion.
So this is part of our policy audit, and we took this particular series first to kind of test out our process because it's pretty straightforward, and we're finding better ways to do the process, we think, for the next group. But I will not read the memo, but I will go down quickly. There are a few areas, all of these are up for board discussion if they'd like, and it is a first read. But there are a few I'd like to point out. So 2100 Goals of the Administrative Body, the committee suggests taking the advice of our attorneys and repealing, as it's not necessary and it doesn't articulate a goal. Duties of the superintendent, which is 2210, we suggest to repeal because it basically is a job description, and it is governed by both state statute and the contract we signed with the superintendent. We could always attach what we currently have as a job description if anyone's worried about losing anything, but I've gone through the contract and there are no particular issues. So we recommended repeal as per the attorney's suggestion. 2200 recruitment of the super. This was also a policy that we are repealing. There's no actual policy. It is one of the board's legal duties. So having a policy is a little superfluous. 2230, the superintendent's contract, that was also recommended to repeal. It is governed by statute. And everyone should be aware, by repealing these, we're not getting rid of anything. What we're doing is conforming to state statute. And so what we are creating is a situation is where we don't have a policy that is not in line with state statute, and then we are not following a policy. Some of these were 2008 and people weren't even looking at them, and we were running our district differently anyway, because we were running it by updated statute. So these repeals, we're not taking away anything from the board. So just keep that in mind as we go through. 2240 superintendent opportunities for development. The committee discussed this. We found it more appropriate as part of contract negotiations than an actual policy saying that you had to offer this to a superintendent candidate, that really is part of your contract negotiations for what you will offer in terms of professional development. 2250, this is one where the committee is looking for board input. Superintendent of schools are required for an annual, boards of education are required to evaluate their superintendents yearly. Our board has put into policy that it requires a written evaluation. That has come up throughout the years as a subject of debate. Not all districts require a written evaluation. Our committee didn't take a position, but noted that given that this conversation had come up at the board, that might be an area we decide. Do we want to say it's written? Do we think that we just want to say we have an evaluation process? That's really an area for board discussion, and the committee would like the board to decide and instruct it on how to move forward. 2260, unavailability of the superintendent. You'll see that there are revisions and the committee would support those revisions. The administration team and the hiring of 20 through 10, the board committee recommends that the board retain the right to hire administrators. 2410, dissemination and implementation of policies and admin regulations. That is a repeal. Keep me honest because I don't have it in front of me, right?
Yes,
it's a repeal. Thanks so much. And 2420, that's another where we are suggesting the board read closely and that we move ahead with the revisions as suggested by our attorney. The most interesting policy we discussed, in my opinion, was this 2610 annual report of the school district. So we asked our attorney what it meant. She didn't know. We asked surrounding towns how they implemented and what it meant. They said they didn't, and they didn't know. So the recommendation was, one, to go find out more. We did that committee. We even asked more people. There's still no clarity on what this is. What this seems to be is a very unclear state statute that we wrote a policy around. So we are in compliance with the statute. We have our annual goals. We receive quarterly updates of them. We have a state of the town. But we are recommending we repeal this policy because it's unclear what the enforcement is. We're not following the policy as written, even though we are meeting the spirit of the policy. And so the idea is right now to remain with state statute, gather further information. If we repeal the policy, we're not losing anything because we still have the state statute, which is guidance, but considering there is no clarity on how to enact that, this is one of those policies where people can read and say, are you doing this? And why are you doing this? And the answer is no one has clarity. So having a policy is not recommended by our attorneys. And I think that what we do need to go by a state statute and then clean this up. We could bring this policy back at some point, but we should bring it back in a cleaned form should we so choose. So hopefully everyone went through this memo because I imagine there are some questions. It is a first read, so we can field some of those questions tonight. If more come up, you can email me. But we are looking to take action on this series at the next meeting so we can move ahead to our next batch, which will be students.
Thank you, Mrs. Ackman. Board questions or comments, first read of these policies. Mrs. McCammon.
I'd like some clarification on 2310, and I think it's something the board should discuss. The stipulation was what we're sort of looking at, and that's the administrative team. What we're sort of looking at is lining up with state statute. What this does is it indicates that we appoint any administrative personnel that we determine to be necessary, which is a little different from what we talk about when we talk about the Board of Education hiring and firing the superintendent, and the superintendent then hiring the rest of our staff. So I'd like to understand what we mean by appoint, what we mean by administrative personnel, where does that begin and end? And to understand how this relates to the state statute more specifically.
So I can give you some feedback, Mrs. Sion can, and then if there's more questions, you can. So what this Board of Education has done is delegate the ability. So boards of education are actually in charge of hiring everyone. You can then delegate. We have delegated hiring teaching positions to the superintendent and the administration. We have retained the right to hire administrators. So vice principals, anyone who falls in that union. Currently, we see sometimes it comes up with supers. Do you need to see this particular administrator? Sometimes one-off delegation. But the feeling of the committee was that it was important that we see principals, vice principals, and administrators, things like department chairs. We have sat in on those meetings, the board interviews, and the board then in public hires. And we have experienced that, and I think we'd continue. We could choose to delegate further. Oversight, my personal opinion would be that we should retain that right. That's kind of our leadership, and we've talked about how they kind of inspire and our learners for the rest of the administration. Mrs. Sion, anything for you?
Nothing else.
I think I'm not fighting retaining it or not. I just wanted to have the discussion. I think one of the things I would point out is we do interview the administrators, but we don't actually participate in the interview process. We're merely a final gate. And I think that's a bit different from the board actually genuinely engaging in an interview. So I think I would just like to understand, I would like us to really understand what power we believe we do and don't have under this policy. Is it just that we're a final gate and we're fine with that? And again, just to clarify, I think administrative is just a broad term. So I don't know whether we want to be more specific or not. I offer it for discussion.
The only thing I would add is I would say we are not a final gate. We have turned away candidates, and we have required multiple candidates be brought to us. So,
A long time ago.
well, but we could at any point, and it has come up in discussions, but it is always a board vote. But the board members should know when they are engaging in those interviews and they're doing their vote, they can reject the candidate. They can require another candidate be brought forward. So I just, not being argumentative, but I would say we are not a gate, and we all need to know that responsibility when we engage in that process, because you can vote no, you can vote yes. And if enough people vote no, the candidate will not be hired. So I think it's very important when the employee comes before us, they see it as an interview, and board members should see it as such as well.
So Jill, is your head around, do we need to define the administrators more? Does it need to be specific to the union or just levels, vice presidents? I mean, the vice principals, have my banking hat on, vice principals, department chairs. And then I guess the only thing that pops into my head is appointing, whereas we also interview. Do we need to, should we define that? I don't know. In some ways I like it more broad because it gives us the flexibility to then delegate to the superintendent. Like if an interim principal or assistant principal is needed, for 3 months, I don't know if I want to be part of that interview process, and hold that process up.
So if you appoint,
yeah.
arguably, the understanding is that you've gone through some process to be able to raise your hand and make a decision. So I
Okay, so
think a
that's assumed.
point
Okay.
is broad.
Okay.
Now, we could then still choose to delegate. We could take a vote as a board and say, I'm delegating in this instance, and the board has also done that. A few years back, when we were hiring multiple interim principals, we chose to delegate that authority
Right.
to the super at the time.
Marge, any insight from other districts or?
No, this is mostly what districts in the DIRG do, is they do a final interview on the administrative staff, which is not only the DAA, and I don't want to make it broad, but you interviewed me and Shirley and Chris and Rich, and we're not. So I would say senior administrative positions and anyone in the DAA. But to
Cabinet
list it,
level?
I think makes it overly restrictive in the policy, because then if we appoint a new position, you have to go and amend the policy.
That's a good point.
So do you have suggested, or maybe you could suggest language, cabinet and DAA members?
I think that that's a discussion that maybe you should have with Dr. Adley, because I don't know, for example, the director of instructional technology, informational technology, I just don't know, because you hired those people before I got here.
Yeah.
So I don't find that the process particularly arduous or otherwise. My understanding is the central cabinet and basically anybody who has an administrative degree and so on, or certification. So that's why I look at that. And it would only become particularly arduous. I'm just talking for myself, okay? It would only become particularly arduous for me if we constantly get into, well, this is not working out, or go get somebody else. Because then the process is, there's something wrong with my selection of people and our selection coming through it. I don't find it arduous in that regard. If we, whatever the feedback is from the board is appropriate, and it doesn't, if I needed to speed it up a bit, I would always come and ask that. You can do that or you cannot do that. I find it helpful, and it's not in the way at the minute for me, right? For the want of a better term, but just so.
So one of the
I think-
indicators that it's working is that it isn't.
Correct.
Particularly arduous, right? And we haven't seen it. However, there have been instances where the board felt strongly there was not a fit. But I will tell you, I can think of one or maybe two instances in that in 6 years. Maybe Duke can think of more or less, but and I think that's indicative of most of the time the board trusts their super, and Mrs. Sion runs a very rigorous interview process, and we sometimes annually or biannually would just get an update on what that process was. But I think the fact that it's not arduous, and I haven't heard from 3 superintendents, other than maybe hiring them, that was arduous, that it is arduous means that it's working, means that generally we have faith in our process, we have faith in our interviews, and Mrs. McCammon, maybe that's why sometimes it feels more like a final gate. But I will tell you, in those hard instances where we've had to say no, it's very difficult. And it's difficult for that reason, but the board felt strongly or got information late in the process and was then able to make a different decision.
Am
I think, go ahead, Jill.
Well, I think when we've said no, it was because we had queued up and we had a choice. And then so we said yes or no to one or the other. I don't know that we have traditionally. So I like I said, I don't honestly
Yes, this
care
board
overly
has
much.
rejected.
We have.
Yes.
We have, okay. But I just want to make sure the board is clear on what this policy does and doesn't give us, and that we're comfortable with it.
Well, and I think too, like in my tenure, and I think it was most over the last year and a half with the new assistant principals, with replacing the Middlesex principal, Tokenique. I mean, I thought the process worked. I mean, my confidence is in Alan and Marge identifying the process and the rigor with which these folks go through before they come up to us at the board level. Look, I think we had a ton of people that we met with based on all the hiring we did over the last year and a half. And I mean, I think it works. So we can continue the dialogue if there's anything you want to change there. Anything else? Questions, comments? All right, we'll have time for further discussion if there's anything else anyone wants to add from a language standpoint.
Yeah, it is only a first read.
Thank you. Thank you for all the work on that. We'll move on to G, action on non-renewal of certified staff working under one-year contracts, long-term substitutes, and permanent building substitutes. Ms. Sion.
And we don't have any action on that tonight.
Okay. All right. That will come back to us.
So we had resignations. They didn't come in time to remove the item from the agenda, but we have no non-renewal.
Understood. Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to action items, personnel items, appointments, resignations, or retirements.
So again, despite a bus driver shortage, Rich manages to find replacements, and that's our appointment tonight.
So we have a motion to approve the personnel item as detailed in the personnel action report dated April 6, 2022. Mrs. Best, second by Mrs. Ackman. All those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. We will move back, Michelle, to public comment. There was a person that you didn't see them, so
I
you
did
moved
see
on,
that
but like
the hand
text
popped
started
up
flying,
after I
so-
told you there were no hands.
Okay,
So I
so
didn't
that's
want to
why
interrupt you.
we have public comment at the end also. So do we have anyone in the audience for public comment? Please come up to the podium. We'll take the audience first. Thank you.
Hi again, Paul Mahalski, 371 Middlesex Road. Just a couple of things I'd ask you to consider as you think about these lights. After 10 years of stalemate and no lights, it was actually the neighbors of the high school who came forward and suggested a collaborative approach. And it was really unprecedented. I think you couldn't find another school district in which lights went through planning and zoning with absolutely no opposition. The spirit of the agreement, if I had to see it, is the golden rule. It was really about do unto others as you would have them do unto you. How do we work that out? The guidelines came after extensive review by the Board of Education and the administration. They were originally created in 2008 by a committee of this board that spent months after many public hearings, and they came up with those guidelines. In 2016, what the administration and the board did was tweak those and refine them. The idea that this was just bilateral between the neighbors and Dr. Brenner is frankly fake news. The Board of Education was not excluded from the process. The process followed just like tonight. Dr. Brenner came before the board. He made a presentation of the administration's proposal for guidelines. There was time for public comment. After that, he sat down with the neighbors to try to work it out in an agreement in a way that the neighbors would not oppose it in the Planning and Zoning Commission. The idea of the special permit was not because of the neighbor agreement. Temporary lights at the high school operated under a special permit for years before these lights happened. As you think about the relevance of other districts, I would just ask you to look at only Greenwich and Westport actually are relevant in any way. All of the other light examples, the schools are nowhere near homes. So they're actually not really relevant to thinking about this. Going back to the golden rule, in November of last year, Dr. Adderley, when you first raised this topic, said that he had talked to the athletic director and that the current guidelines were working for the school with the possible exception of having a Tuesday night game. Increasing usage just because you can, to me, is not in the spirit of the golden rule. A 50% increase in the number of games feels more like lights leap than just the lights creep that neighbors had been worrying about. And light nuisance is not whether a drone sees spillage into neighborhoods. The light issue is looking out and seeing a landing strip of light out behind your backyard. And then please finally remember, it's not really about the lights. It's about everything that comes with games. The noise, the traffic, trash. Games are really where the issue comes up. Thanks very much.
Thank you for speaking. Anyone else in the audience? Do we have anyone online, Michelle?
There are no raised hands at this time.
All right. Let's do a double check. All right. Thank you all. Thank you all for the conversation. Thank you for coming in person and online. I wish everyone a safe break. Thank you, Olivia and John, for joining us.
I'm sorry.
I'm heading there. I'm fine. Motion to adjourn. Julie Best, second by Dennis Maroney. All those in favor, aye. Good night.